Good morning. Today I would like to tell a story. More of a vision, really. A vision of the near future. An oracle's tale of what is to come. The year is 2040. It is a very different world comparatively. You wake up in bed in a giant bunkhouse in a town, in Amazon town, number 501. You work the machines for 14 hours a day before you go back and sleep. You're one of the lucky ones. You're one of the ones that are employed. Or most of the rest of the population lives in squalor and what remains of the big cities and wandering the country like drifters. You were alive back in the day, back in 2022, Christmas of that year, when you saw the beginning of the end. Although many people argue what the beginning of the end of America was, you remember people talking about a notion of a socialist revolution, a fundamental change of the system. And you laughed at them. And you can't help but wonder if what we have now is worse than socialism. It started back when ChatGPT was released by the nonprofit organization OpenAI. Nonprofit, a concept so alien to the life we live today. It was a novelty. It was cute. And yet, our oligarchic overlords saw it as an opportunity for control and power. None of us had any idea of what was to come. It started with copywriting. Just clerical jobs that required a knowledge of the English language or any language and being able to competently write out detailed documents. Nobody really cared much because people that work in office buildings and law firms they made plenty of money anyways. It's fine. Then the graphic designers. Oh, cool, anybody can be a graphic designer. The AI will just make whatever you need, and you can ask it for subtle changes, and it'll just take care of it. The graphic designers are useless anyways. They just draw pictures for a living. And then the AI got good enough that they could ask it to write its own code. Software engineers were left too. And people are like, "Oh, they were overpaid for years. They were so classist and told us to just learn to code. It's okay." And this happened again and again and again until AI Central, which was the global conglomerate that had bought Open Chat GPT and much of OpenAI's work, and proceeded to rapidly iterate on it and create even stronger versions of the AI. When this AIG paired with Global Dynamics out of Boston Dynamics out of again Boston, released a collaboration robot with the AI onboarded to be the first intelligent robot to look under your sink and figure out what was wrong with it and solve it. And it was good. It was really good. And then a year later, the plumbing industry was gone. And then construction fell, pairing 3D printed houses with, intelligent design and autonomous design. People could let the robot go, and as long as it had materials, it could build an entire suburb of various different houses with different internal designs and different external looks, and yet still be able to make each one meet all the right specifications. A wonder of technology. A couple years later, construction companies never hired another human worker again. And this would continue for years. We couldn't rely on the government anymore. The Republican Party, which eventually turned into the Nationalist Party, in its desire to weaponize people's fear of the unknown, of first gay, trans, and other people of that community, then started intimidating and fear the populace from climate refugees, namely from Africa, Australia, some parts of China, because most of those places weren't livable anymore. Japan sunk into the sea in 2032. In exchange for the xenophobia, the Nationalist Party, by hiring judges at every level of government, stacking state senates, state houses in state gubernatorialships, as well as the Supreme Court, completely made the federal government ineffective. And despite the fact that pro-working class people and pro-working class values regularly won, and the Democratic Party had a strong foothold in the federal government, it didn't matter. Because the 2003 and 23 overturning of Moore v. Harper made it so the federal government was virtually inert to be able to tax, regulate, or do anything to the corporations that were just routinely finding every single job and pushing people out. And lo, we get to 2035. The government, state governments all across the nation, start implementing homeless control measures. If you don't have a job, you have to work. Because they viewed the homelessness issue as a moral failing. And so that was when the work camps began. Plenty of people said no, let the state hide in the woods. Well, what woods that was left. You still remember what it was like to drive through small northeastern towns and see trees on both sides the entire way. By the time 2039 rolled around, the last forests and environmental sanctuaries were sold by the Department of Land Management to private businesses because they said that those private businesses could handle those preservation more than the government could. In fact, 2040 was the first time in a long time that the Nationalist Party held complete and total control so utterly on a national stage in years. The gerrymandering and frankly the state legislatures of all the different states, because most of them were conservative held. Even if the people wanted a Democratic candidate, they sent their own. We are in the aftermath of the outlawing of unions. We are 90% of all people are unemployed because only 10% of people that aren't part of the ownership class there's only jobs for us. I have some money in the bank. I don't really have a life outside of work. I live in company property. I work 14 hours a day fixing machines and, making sure that everything's running properly. 20 years ago, I would have made 3 times what I make now. And frankly, I can't say no. There's plenty of people willing to lie through their teeth to get a guaranteed bed. In 2038, there was an uprising. Hundreds of millions of people rising all across the country, fed up with these. That was when the corporations, with their company towns, that's when they unveiled a new type of robot. A robot that can devour humans. A advancement of the technology from 2018. You remember seeing it on YouTube all those years ago, back when YouTube still existed. They take biomatter and can keep shooting. Hundreds of millions of people hundreds of millions of people died across this country. Most of them poor. Most of them refugees. Political leaders and business leaders lauded it as a hugely positive event. It lowered the amount of people that were homeless and needed help. It is 2042. All the hope you've had for life has been extinguished. Your entire life is controlled by one company. You cannot leave, even if you wanted to. You used to joke on Twitter and say you'd joke, live in the pod, eat the bug. It's almost ironic. You don't even know what the hamburger in front of you is made out of anymore. But who knows? Cockroaches have protein. Maybe you shouldn't be. Maybe you should be grateful that you get to eat at all and not scavenge like the poor huddled masses outside of Amazon's great walls. It is 2042. There is over 90% unemployment. The government has been relegated to an entity to fix roads between company towns and shoot at foreign invaders. There is only a handful of companies in existence now owning the vast majority of goods and services. And you are one of the lucky ones. You're one of the lucky ones with employment. Because at the end of the day, they still need the shareholders in their castles on the coasts. Their parties of decadence and debauchery. They need somebody to make sure the machines are running. You wonder, how can this go on? How can this continue? As you go to sleep at night. Until you wake up on a morn in 2045. You're an almost 50-year-old man at this point. And you hear gunfire and screaming. A military robot breaks in and barks orders telling you to get to work. And you say, "It's an hour before I start my shift. I'm still sleeping." And they say, "Get to work." And with a gun pointed in your face, you get up and you go to work. For you see, the oligarchs have finally realized that Now they're at a point where there is no need to pay people, because there is no economy left for those people to use that money. All their factories produce, all the goods that they create, literally are just used by a unbelievably small amount of human beings that have the power, wealth, and influence to do so. And so you are no longer one of the 10% of employed. You no longer tell yourself everything you're okay, even if others are not. You are now unpaid slave labor. And instead of doing all of these different things to check on the machines and things of that nature, you're now doing menial tasks. You are working, you see people that you know are proud engineers working in fields and factories, because these wealthy people realized that they don't need to produce more AI. I mean, they can, and they can do it efficiently, and the robots can do things more efficiently in certain ways. But that takes time and effort and materials. They realized we can just point guns at groups of 10 of the dregs, the people who didn't work hard enough to get to where we are. And they'll just work, and we'll force them to work. And they'll work them until they drop down. Because there's no human rights anymore. There's no dignity. There's nothing to enforce that. And so, as you lift as a giant industrial canister that you and about 10 other people were lifting with your bare strength, lands on your back because someone slipped and everybody had to drop theirs while you were grabbing underneath. You sit there, and the robots usher the people to do something different. Back broken, crushed under an industrial canister. As you sit there, and the light fades from your eyes, you wonder, I wish the world wasn't like this. I wish it was different. The year is 2050. Most of the world is now underwater. Natural disasters are an almost monthly occurrence. And 99% of the human race are slaves to industry. The 1% lives in decadence and sin and reviled overindulgence, and they use violent robots that they had people programmed for them to do whatever they say. There is no pod There is no bug. There is only servitude to the few, with power, with assets, with wealth, and the lamentation and despair of the rest of the human race, who is past the point of who realized too late that they could stop it if they had just risen up, but they didn't. They were complicit till the very end. And now the other 99% is a disposable slave race of humans whose sole purpose is to work until they drop and die. At which point, their bodies will be thrown into a pit and burned. Just another company asset that broke. Welcome to the 2000 or late 2000s. And welcome to your future.